Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku was recruited into the Suicide Squad. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The air on the rooftop was thin, tasting of smog and shattered dreams. Each word from the skeletal man before him was a perfectly weighted stone, dropped one by one into the placid pool of Izuku Midoriya's lifelong ambition. The ripples were devastating. It's not bad to dream. But you also have to consider what's realistic, young man. The first stone. Izuku's hands, clenched so tightly his knuckles were white mountains on a pale landscape, trembled at his sides. He had just poured his entire soul onto the scuffed concrete at the feet of his idol, the symbol of peace, All Might himself. He had asked the question that had been the sun, moon, and stars of his existence since he was 4 years old. Can I be a hero without a quirk? Pros are always laying their lives on the line, so I honestly can't say that you can become a hero without a quirk. The second, heavier stone. It struck the bottom, stirring up the mud and silt of a decade of doubt, of Bakugo's jeers, of the doctor's pitying gaze. The water turned murky, the clear reflection of his future distorting into something unrecognizable. All Might delivered the rest of his speech with a practiced, gentle regret. He spoke of other ways to help, of becoming a police officer or a doctor. They were good, noble professions. To Izuku, they were consolation prizes, participation trophies for a race he wasn't even allowed to run. The hero's back was turned as he walked toward the rooftop edge, his words a final, clinical epitaph for the boy Izuku used to be. It's good to have a dream, just make sure it's a realistic one. The final stone. The pool didn't just ripple, it froze over. A sudden, crystalline sheet of ice formed over the surface of his heart, locking the turmoil beneath a cold, smooth, and unbreakable facade. The heavy thud of the rooftop doors swinging shut echoed in the sudden silence. It was a sound of absolute finality. All Might was gone, and with him the bright, burning star that had guided Izuku's life had been snuffed out, leaving only a cold, infinite black. He stood there for a long time, the city's hum a distant, meaningless drone. There were no tears. The searing despair he expected never came. In its place was a profound, chilling emptiness. It was the quiet that follows a catastrophic explosion, the air still and heavy with fallout. He looked down at his hands. They were just hands. Quirkless, useless, ordinary hands. The hands of a spectator. The walk home was an act of automation. His feet knew the path, a route worn smooth by countless journeys filled with excited muttering and frantic note-taking. Today, his mind was a silent, empty auditorium. He didn't see the bustling crowds or hear the blare of traffic. He certainly didn't hear the distant explosions and frantic shouts as a sludge villain, having escaped its soda bottle prison, found a new, explosive host. Fate, it seemed, had a different path for him now. He was no longer on the board. He was just a piece that had been swept off and discarded. When he arrived home, his mother's cheerful greeting was a foreign sound from a world he no longer inhabited. Izuku! Welcome home! Dinner's almost ready. I'm making your favorite, Katsudon. Okay, Mom, he replied, his voice a monotone instrument he barely recognized. He slipped off his shoes, his movements precise and deliberate. He walked past the kitchen, ignoring the comforting aroma, and went straight to his room. His room was a shrine. A technicolor explosion of hero worship dedicated to one man. All Might posters papered the walls. All Might figurines stood in heroic poses on every shelf. The All Might bedsheets, the All Might lamp, the All Might alarm clock. It was a monument to a god who had just declared him an apostate. He felt nothing. No anger, no sadness. Just a profound sense of disconnect, as if he were looking at the bedroom of a boy who had died. His gaze fell upon the row of notebooks on his desk. Hero Analysis for the Future. 13 volumes. His life's work. The culmination of thousands of hours of obsessive observation, deduction, and hope. He picked up volume 13, its pages still crisp. He flipped through it. Detailed sketches of Kamui Woods' binding techniques, an analysis of MT Lady's structural weaknesses, notes on Eraserhead's line-of-sight dependency. It was brilliant. It was intricate. It was utterly, pathetically pointless. With the same methodical calm he'd used to walk home, he began to gather them. He stacked them neatly, one on top of the other. He took them, along with a box of matches from the kitchen drawer, to the small, rust-stained incinerator behind their apartment building. One by one, he fed his dreams to the fire. He didn't toss them in with a flourish of rage. He placed each page in carefully, watching as the flames licked at the ink. He watched his detailed drawing of All Might's Texas Smash curl into black ash. He watched his breakdown of Endeavor's heat regulation turn to smoke. He wasn't destroying his work, he was rendering it down to its base components. He was analyzing its destruction. The fire consumed the vibrant colors, leaving only monochrome embers. It devoured the hopeful scrawls, leaving only the dispassionate heat. With each page that vanished, Izuku felt a piece of his old self burn away with it. The stuttering, anxious Famba. The optimistic dreamer. The hero worshipper. All of it turned to ash and smoke, rising into the indifferent twilight sky. When the last page was gone, he stood over the glowing embers, not as Izuku Midoriya, the would-be hero, but as something new. Something cold, sharp, and forged in the death of a dream. The mirror hadn't just cracked, it had shattered. And the boy looking back from the million tiny shards was a stranger. 4 years later, the room was a spider's web, spun from coaxial cables and stolen fiber-optic lines. The only light came from the cold, blue-white glow of 6 monitors arranged in a semicircle. They bathed the face of a young man in a sterile, flickering luminescence. Izuku Midoriya, now 17, was no longer the scrawny, wide-eyed boy from that rooftop. He was still lean, but there was a coiled tension in his frame, a predator's stillness. His hair was an unruly mess of dark green, but his eyes, once large and expressive, were now constantly scanning, processing, calculating. They were the eyes of a hawk, missing nothing. This room, hidden behind a false wall in his mother's apartment, was his cockpit. His throne. His entire world. The All Might posters were long gone, replaced by sprawling network diagrams, blueprints of high-security buildings, and schematics for custom-built electronics. The air hummed with the whir of cooling fans and smelled of ozone and stale coffee. His mother, Inko, thought he was studying for a lucrative career in cybersecurity. She was proud of his focus, even if it worried her how little he left his room. She had no idea her son was the most wanted and most sought-after information broker in Japan's criminal and vigilante underground. They called him Analysis. A ghost in the machine. A name whispered in encrypted forums and dead-dropped chat rooms. He was a myth to most, a terrifyingly efficient resource to a select few. He didn't have a quirk, but he had something far more versatile, a god-tier intellect untethered by heroic morality. He had weaponized his mind. A quiet chime drew his attention to the central monitor. A direct, encrypted voice channel opened. Knuckleduster online. The text was simple, crude. Izuku donned a sleek headset, a filter masking his voice into a synthetic, gender-neutral monotone. Report, Knuckleduster. I'm in position, a gruff voice rasped on the other end, the sound of wind whistling in the background suggesting a rooftop perch. Just like you said? Warehouse 3B, Nishinomiya Docks. Looks quiet. Knuckleduster was a typical client. A C-list vigilante with a minor strength enhancement quirk that let him punch slightly harder than a normal man. Ambitious, but tactically inept. Without Izuku, he'd be a headline in tomorrow's paper, vigilante beaten to a pulp by Yakuza. With Izuku, he was a scalpel. Izuku's fingers flew across his keyboard, a blur of motion. On one screen, live satellite imagery of the docks. On another, the warehouse's stolen security schematics. On a third, a program he'd written was sifting through the city's power grid data, monitoring for fluctuations. Quiet is a tactic, not a state, Analysis's voice stated, devoid of emotion. You are not clear. There are 4 guards on the ground floor, playing cards in the Northwest Security Office. 2 more are patrolling the second-floor catwalks. Counterclockwise rotation, 12-minute intervals. They are armed with standard 9mm sidearms. Your entry point is the 3rd-floor maintenance hatch on the southern face. It is unalarmed. The lock is a standard grade 2 pin tumbler. You have the pick I specified? Yeah, got it, Knuckleduster grumbled, the sound of metal scraping against metal coming through the comm. Your target is a server rack in the sublevel data hub, Izuku continued, his eyes tracking the patrolman on the schematic. It contains shipping manifests for a quirk-enhancing drug known as Trigger. Your client, the journalist, wants the data. My payment is contingent on its successful retrieval. Do not deviate. The next 10 minutes were a masterclass in remote warfare. Izuku was the general, Knuckleduster the soldier. Hold. Catwalk guard approaching your sector. He is 7 seconds from your position. Remain silent. The sound of breathing on the other end hitched. He's passed. You have a 4-minute window. Move. Izuku guided him through the darkened warehouse with chilling precision. Crate to your left contains scrap metal. Use it for cover. The floorboard 3 meters ahead has a pressure sensor underneath. Skirt the wall. How the hell do you know that? Knuckleduster whispered, awed. The building's original blueprints were filed with the City Planning Commission in 1988. They specified reinforced flooring for heavy machinery, but budget cuts led to a cheaper pine subfloor in the eastern wing, requiring sensor plates to monitor for weight stress. It was a cost-saving measure. Now move. They reached the data hub. The server was protected by a laser grid. It's a goddamn laser show down here. Analysis. I can't get through, Knuckleduster hissed. You can, Izuku replied calmly. He typed a rapid string of code. In the warehouse, the overhead fluorescent lights flickered once, twice, then died, plunging the room into darkness. Emergency power kicked in a second later, but the brief surge was all Izuku needed. The power cycle has forced the laser grid's emitter into a diagnostic reboot. It will take 90 seconds to recalibrate. The grid is down. Go. Knuckleduster scrambled, retrieved the hard drive, and was out of the building before the guards on the ground floor even realized the lights had flickered. Package secured, the vigilante panted, back on a nearby rooftop. Payment has been transferred to your account, Izuku said, already closing the relevant windows on his screen. Our transaction is complete. Delete this channel. Wait. That was incredible. We could be a team. Izuku disconnected the line. Knuckleduster was a tool, and the job was done. There was no room for partners or camaraderie. Those were attachments. Attachments were weaknesses. His only attachment was to the data, to the patterns, to the perfect execution of a plan. It was the only thing that made him feel anything resembling satisfaction. It wasn't the thrill of heroism. It was the cold, clean perfection of a solved equation. But the equations were becoming too simple. The Yakuza, low-level vigilantes, corporate espionage, it was all becoming routine. A quiet, dangerous hubris had begun to fester in the sterile dark of his room. He needed a greater challenge. He needed to test his analysis against a truly complex system. And there was no system more complex, more corrupt, and more powerful than the one that had rejected him. His next target was the Hero Public Safety Commission. It started small. An anonymous data packet sent to an independent news outlet detailing how a popular heroes charity was a tax evasion scheme. Then, a leak of internal HPSC memos showing they had deliberately buried evidence of excessive force used by the number 12 hero, Captain Celebrity, during an incident in America. Izuku was a phantom, slipping through their firewalls like smoke. He never stayed in one place, routing his signal through a dizzying chain of proxies across the globe. He felt untouchable. He was smarter than them. He was faster. He was a quirkless boy dismantling the institution of heroes from his bedroom, and the irony was a bitter, satisfying meal. His mistake was underestimating their resources. The HPSC didn't just have cybersecurity experts. They had heroes, and when they realized their digital ghost was too slippery to catch in the net, they sent a hunter who didn't use one. Shoto Aizawa, the pro-hero eraserhead, was not a man who trusted technology. He trusted his own eyes, his own instincts, and the undeniable reality of cause and effect. While the HPSC's tech teams chased a digital specter from servers in Germany to Brazil, Aizawa started on the ground in Tokyo. He didn't look for an IP address. He looked for ripples in the physical world. Who sold the specific high-end processors needed for this level of decryption? Where were there unexplained power surges in residential districts that correlated with the times of the data breaches? Who had recently purchased military-grade encryption software using untraceable cryptocurrency? It was slow, methodical, brilliantly logical work. He was analyzing the analyst. Izuku first sensed something was wrong when his customary checks started showing anomalies. An inquiry into a component purchase he'd made 6 months ago. A quiet flag on the power grid in his district. Small, insignificant things on their own, but together they formed a pattern. Someone wasn't just chasing his digital trail. Someone was walking it backwards. Panic, a long dormant emotion, pricked at the edges of his cold composure. He accelerated his timeline, getting sloppy. He initiated his final data dump, a massive file containing proof that the HPSC was secretly funding quirk suppression experiments, and began scrubbing his own systems, preparing to go dark for good. It was too late. As the progress bar for the data transfer crawled towards 100%, an alert flashed on his security monitor. A motion sensor on the fire escape outside his window had been tripped. He killed the power to the entire room, plunging himself into absolute darkness and silence. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. He grabbed a small, custom-built taser and a flash drive containing his most essential tools, and slipped out of his room, melting into the shadows of the apartment. He moved silently, a ghost in his own home. He had to get out, get to a safe house, and disappear. He made it to the ground floor and slipped out the back entrance into a narrow, trash-filled alley. The night air was cold. He took a breath, ready to sprint, ready to vanish into the city's labyrinth. A long, gray scarf shot out from the darkness above, wrapping around his arm with impossible speed and strength. It constricted, and he dropped the taser with a cry of pain. A figure landed silently in front of him, blocking the alley's exit. The man was tall and gaunt, with tired eyes that glowed a faint, menacing red. He wore a strange assortment of gear, but his scarf, floating around him as if alive, and those glowing eyes were unmistakable. Eraserhead. It's over. Analysis. The hero's voice was a low, weary drawl. Izuku's mind raced, processing variables, calculating odds. Physical confrontation was a 0% probability of success. Escape was unlikely. His eyes darted around, looking for an angle, a weakness. The hero's quirk required line of sight. But in this narrow alley, there was nowhere to hide. You've been a thorn in the Commission's side for months, Aizawa continued, taking a slow step forward. I'll admit you're good. But you got arrogant. Izuku didn't speak. His identity was still protected. He was just a random kid in an alley. There was no proof. Aizawa seemed to read his mind. We traced the power draw. We cross-referenced it with deliveries of high-end server equipment. We've been watching this building for a week. Your little data bomb tonight was the confirmation we needed. He gestured with his chin towards Izuku's apartment window. Quite a setup for a kid. The hero's eyes widened fractionally as he got a clearer look at Izuku in the dim light. The face staring back at him wasn't the hardened cyber-terrorist or seasoned villain he'd expected. It was a teenager, a skinny, freckled kid who looked like he'd lose a fight to a strong breeze. You're a child, Aizawa said, a flicker of disbelief in his voice. And you have no quirk. He could feel it. The lack of a quirk factor was a strange emptiness to his senses. The game was over. Izuku had been out-analyzed. The cold composure he had cultivated for 4 years finally cracked. He slumped against the grimy brick wall, the fight draining out of him. He was just a quirkless kid again, cornered by a real hero. The shattered mirror showed him a reflection he couldn't deny, a failure. The cell in Tartarus was a masterpiece of sensory deprivation. The walls, floor, and ceiling were a seamless expanse of sterile white. There was no sound save for the faint hum of the air recyclers. There were no windows, no clocks, no way to mark the passage of time. For a mind like Izuku's, which thrived on data and external stimuli, it was a special kind of hell. He had been stripped of his gear, his clothes replaced with a simple gray jumpsuit. They had questioned him for what felt like days. He'd said nothing. Not his name, not his motives. He was a blank slate. He knew his digital trail was a mess of dead ends and false identities. His only real crime they could prove was resisting arrest and possession of illegal electronics. But they knew he was analysis, and for that, they had locked him in the deepest, darkest hole in the world. He sat on the simple cot, staring at the white wall opposite him, his mind a turmoil of recalculations. He had made a critical error in his threat assessment. He had focused on the Commission's digital defenses and had neglected their human assets. A variable he had failed to properly quantify. A fatal mistake. The silence was broken by the hiss of a pneumatic lock. The seamless white wall slid open, revealing a figure that radiated an authority more absolute than any pro-hero or police chief he had ever encountered. She was a woman of middling height, with a stern, unyielding face framed by short, dark hair. She wore a perfectly tailored black business suit that seemed less like clothing and more like armor. Her eyes were chips of obsidian, and they scanned him not as a person, but as a problem to be solved. She held a black tablet in her hand. She stepped into the cell, the door hissing shut behind her. She didn't introduce herself. She didn't need to. Power like hers was a statement in itself. Izuku Midoriya, she said, her voice a low, commanding baritone. It wasn't a question. The name, his real name, hit him like a physical blow. He hadn't heard it in years. Born July 15th, Quirk None, Mother, Inko Midoriya. Father, Hisashi Midoriya, currently working abroad. You were an exemplary student until middle school. Then, your grades became merely adequate. You showed no interest in high school, opting for an online general education program which you completed with minimal effort. To the world you are a shut-in. A hikikomori. A quiet, unremarkable boy living with his mother. She swiped a finger across the tablet screen. She turned it to face him. On the screen was his entire life. Not the fabricated one, but the real one. Encrypted chat logs he thought were indecipherable. Cryptocurrency wallets he thought were anonymous. A schematic of his own hidden room, mapped out in perfect detail. A live satellite feed of his mother leaving her part-time job. A cold dread, far deeper than his encounter with Eraserhead, washed over him. This wasn't the HPSC. This was something else. Something higher up the food chain. You are also analysis, she continued, her voice unwavering. Responsible for 47 documented breaches of secure corporate and government networks. You have facilitated the illegal activities of at least a dozen unregistered vigilantes. You have caused an estimated 8 billion yen in damages and destabilized public trust in 3 major hero agencies. You're a hard man to find, Izuku Midoriya. She lowered the tablet, her eyes locking onto his. There was no malice in her gaze, no anger. There was only appraisal, like a butcher examining a side of beef. My name is Amanda Waller, she said, finally giving him a name to put to the terror. And for a boy with no power, you've caused quite a lot of trouble. Most would see that as a liability, a loose end to be tied off and buried. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle in the sterile silence. Izuku's mind, for the first time in years, was utterly blank. There were no angles to play, no systems to exploit. He was completely and totally outmaneuvered. He was a piece in a game he didn't even know he was playing. Waller took another step closer, her shadow falling over him. I, however, she said, a ghost of a smile touching her lips, see it as a successful job interview. I have a position open on a team I'm putting together. The work is dangerous, the mortality rate is significant. But it's a chance to use that brain of yours for something other than rotting in this box. She extended a hand, not to him, but as a gesture to the world beyond his cell. I have a job offer for you, Mr. Midoriya. It's time to put your analysis to a real test. The sterile white of the Tartarus cell was an absolute. It absorbed all hope, all identity, leaving only the cold, hard fact of Izuku Midoriya's complete and utter powerlessness. Amanda Waller stood before him, a monolith of authority in a black suit, her job offer hanging in the dead air like the promise of a guillotine. Izuku's mind, which had been a frantic storm of escaped calculations and despairing self-recrimination, suddenly went still. The storm didn't dissipate. It coalesced into a single, sharp point of focus. The emotional, panicked part of his brain was shoved into a locked room, and the analyst took the controls. He was a prisoner in the world's most secure facility, being offered a death sentence by a woman who held his life on a tablet. He had no leverage. He had no power. This was, therefore, the most interesting tactical problem he had ever faced. You're quiet. Waller noted, her voice flat. Most people in your position would be begging, or screaming, or trying to bargain for their freedom. Izuku finally lifted his head, his green eyes scrubbed clean of their former youthful light, meeting hers. They were like pieces of sea glass, worn smooth and cold by a relentless tide. Bargaining for freedom would be illogical, he stated, his voice a low, steady monotone that surprised even himself. You are not offering freedom, you are offering a different cage, with a higher probability of termination. Freedom is not a variable on the table, a flicker of something. Surprise? Interest? Crossed Waller's face before being suppressed. Aptly put. So you accept? Acceptance is contingent on receiving adequate information, Izuku countered. He pushed himself off the cot, his posture straightening. He was still a scrawny teenager in a gray jumpsuit, but he addressed her as an equal. You mentioned a team. I require profiles on all potential team members, psychological, physical, and quirk-based assessments. You mentioned dangerous work. I require operational parameters, standard rules of engagement, and a clear chain of command. You mentioned a significant mortality rate. This implies a control method. He paused, his gaze unwavering. Let's talk about the bomb you're going to put in my neck. Waller's lips tightened into a thin, dangerous line. She had dealt with psychopaths, mercenaries, and gods. None of them had ever responded to her pitch with a request for a technical specifications sheet. It's a subcutaneous RDX nanite charge, she said, deciding to play his game. High-frequency trigger, unique to my personal detonator. Range is effectively global. Any attempt to tamper with it, shield it, or remove it will result in immediate detonation. The blast is precise. It will sever your spinal cord and cauterize the wound. It is non-negotiable. Izuku processed this. RDX was stable but powerful. Nanite delivery meant it was impossible to remove surgically. A frequency trigger was hackable in theory, but not without knowing the encryption, and not from the inside. Understood, he said. My cooperation will require certain assets. I'll need a hardened personal data device with a multi-spectrum scanner, access to all available schematics and satellite intel for any given mission area, and a fabrication unit for the creation of mission-specific, non-standard equipment. My skills are in information and strategy. Operating without the proper tools is inefficient. Waller almost laughed. The sheer, unadulterated audacity of this quirkless child, negotiating terms from the bottom of a hole, was astounding. He wasn't asking to live. He was asking for a better toolbox to do the dying she'd assigned him. You're not in a position to make demands, Mr. Midoriya. I'm not making demands, Izuku replied calmly. I am stating the parameters for my optimal performance. You have identified me as a valuable asset. An asset is only valuable if utilized correctly. Providing me with these tools increases the mission success probability. Denying them increases the chance of failure and the loss of your entire investment, the team. It is a simple cost-benefit analysis. The cost to you is minimal. The potential benefit is mission accomplishment. He had taken her own ruthless pragmatism and thrown it back in her face. He had analyzed her. Amanda Waller stared at him for a long, silent moment. This boy was more than a hacker. He was a weapon. A different kind of weapon than she was used to, but a weapon nonetheless. And weapons needed to be properly maintained. Your requests, she said, her voice dangerously soft, are noted. She turned to leave. Get him processed. He's greenlit for Task Force X. The guards that entered were not gentle. Izuku was shackled, a thick canvas hood pulled over his head, plunging him into a world of rough fabric and muffled sounds. He was marched through corridors, loaded onto a transport, and subjected to a long, turbulent flight. He didn't resist. He simply absorbed the data. The hum of the engines suggested a VTOL aircraft. The changes in pressure indicated high altitude. The duration of the flight placed their destination somewhere offshore. Every piece of information was a weapon in waiting. When the hood was finally pulled off, the assault on his senses was immediate. The air was thick, humid, and heavy with the smell of salt, rust, and something acridly chemical. He stood on a grated metal catwalk in the center of a massive, circular chamber. Tiers of cells rose up around him, their occupants, a grotesque collection of villains and metahuman monstrosities, either staring in silence or rattling their cages, their howls and shrieks echoing in the cavernous space. This wasn't a prison. It was a zoo for nightmares. This was Belle Reve, home sweet home. A guard grunted, shoving him forward. Waller wants the new meat in the yard with the others. The yard was a large, open-air section of the prison, caged in by electrified fences and overlooked by sniper towers. The ground was cracked concrete, the sky a perpetually gray, hazy smear. A handful of inmates were scattered about, an island of lethal dysfunction. These, Izuku deduced, were his new colleagues. A man with a shaved head and a meticulously groomed goatee was methodically cleaning a complex-looking rifle at a metal table. He didn't look up as Izuku approached, but his eyes, cold and professional, tracked him in the reflection of a polished scope. A woman with bleached blonde hair and twin pigtails, one dipped in pink, the other in blue, was hanging upside down from a pull-up bar, humming a discordant nursery rhyme. Her eyes, wide and unnervingly blue, snapped open and focused on him, a grin spreading across her face like a crack in porcelain. In the corner, a hulking brute of a man was pacing back and forth, his cheap orange jumpsuit stretched taut over muscles that seemed to have muscles. He wore a ludicrously oversized boomerang strapped to his back and was muttering curses to himself. And then there was the thing. Sitting on the ground, leaning against the fence, was a creature that defied biology. It was immense, easily 9 feet tall, with the body of a hypermuscular man and the head of a great white shark. Its skin was gray and leathery, its eyes black, soulless pits. It was chewing on a large metal pipe, occasionally breaking off a piece with a sickening crunch. Izuku came to a stop in the center of the yard, the guards retreating and locking the gate behind him. He was now officially in the shark tank. The first to approach was the loudmouth with the boomerang. He swaggered over, a cheap beer clutched in one hand, a leer on his face. Well, look what we have here, boys. Fresh meat. Did you get lost on your way to high school, kid? Izuku's eyes scanned him, his mind cataloging details with practiced speed. Digger Harkness, aka Captain Boomerang. Australian national. Master of specialized boomerangs. Arrested by the Flash multiple times. File indicated a cowardly streak, a penchant for betrayal, and a deep-seated inferiority complex. What's the matter, cat? Got your tongue? Digger sneered, getting in Izuku's face. The smell of stale beer and sweat washed over him. Or are you just scared? Don't worry, I'll take it easy on ya. Just give me your first week's commissary, and maybe I won't use ya for target practice. Izuku remained perfectly still, his expression neutral. Your center of gravity is off, he said, his voice quiet but clear. You favor your left leg, the result of a poorly healed tibial fracture from 3 years ago, likely from a high-velocity impact consistent with being kicked by a speedster. Your right hand is callous from the grip of your primary weapon, but there's a micro-tremor in your index finger, indicative of a reliance on cheap stimulants to steady your nerves. The aggressive posturing is a classic overcompensation for profound insecurity. You're not a predator. You're just loud. Digger Harkness froze, his jaw slack. He stared at Izuku, his boorish confidence deflating like a punctured balloon. He had been stripped bare, dissected, and labeled in less than 10 seconds. He sputtered, opened his mouth, then closed it again, and simply backed away, muttering under his breath. A peal of high-pitched laughter cut through the tension. The woman dropped from the bar, landing in a perfect crouch before springing towards him. She skipped the last few feet, circling him like a curious, brightly colored predator. Oh, I like this one, she chirped, her voice a sing-song of delighted madness. He's a thinky thinker. A little brainiac. What's your name, broccoli sprout? She poked his cheek. Her touch was surprisingly gentle. Harleen Quinzel, Izuku stated, not reacting to the poke. Former psychiatrist at Arkham Asylum, diagnosed with acute shared psychotic disorder, fell into a codependent and abusive relationship with the Joker. Expert gymnast, unpredictable fighter, highly intelligent but emotionally volatile. Your chaos is a performance, a shield built to protect a core of deep-seated trauma. Harley's smile didn't falter, but her eyes sharpened with a psychiatrist's analytical gleam. Well, look at you. Somebody did his homework. Or are you just really, really good at seeing the cracks in people? She tilted her head, her pigtails swaying. You got more cracks than anyone here, Sprout. You've built a whole fortress of books and numbers around yourself, but I can hear the little boy inside screaming. It's adorable. She cackled again and skipped away, leaving Izuku with an unsettling feeling of being seen in a way he hadn't been since the fire 4 years ago. The man with the rifle finally looked up. He set his weapon down with a quiet, reverent click. Floyd Lawton, he said, his voice a low, gravelly baritone. He didn't offer a handshake. Deadshot, the world's deadliest marksman, Izuku recited. Never misses. Motivated primarily by a desire to provide for your daughter Zoe, you have a death wish, but you're too professional to act on it during a mission. You see this as a job. Nothing more, nothing less. Deadshot raised an eyebrow, a flicker of grudging respect in his eyes. You're well informed. Or you're a stalker. Either way, here's the only thing you need to know about me, kid. Don't get in my line of fire. Do your job, and stay out of my way. We're not friends. We're not a team. We're coworkers at a job with a 100% turnover rate. He picked up his rifle and went back to cleaning it. The conversation declared over. Izuku was left with the last inmate. The shark man had stopped chewing his pipe and was now staring at him with an unnerving primal focus. It lumbered to its feet, its massive frame blocking out the gray sky. Each step shook the concrete. It stopped a few feet from Izuku, sniffing the air. No. It rumbled, its voice a deep, guttural sound from the depths of the ocean. King Shark. It pointed a thick, three-fingered hand at its own chest, then pointed it at Izuku. Food? Izuku's analytical mind, for a brief moment, was overwhelmed by a very primal, very logical fear of being eaten. He held up a hand, a placating gesture. Hand? King Shark said, mistaking the gesture. He looked at his own massive hand, then back at Izuku's. He seemed satisfied with the exchange of information. He then opened his mouth, a cavern of serrated, needle-like teeth, and let out a massive yawn before lumbering back to his spot and sitting down. Izuku let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. This was his team. A washed-up Aussie thug, a clinically insane ex-psychiatrist, a suicidal assassin, and a demigod fishman. And him, the quirkless analyst. The probability of mission success had just dropped by a statistically significant margin. The medical bay at Belle Reve was the antithesis of the Tartarus cell. It was cluttered, stained, and smelled of antiseptic trying and failing to cover the scent of blood. Izuku sat on a cold metal table, flanked by 2 guards armed with high-frequency suppression rifles. A medic with dead eyes and trembling hands was preparing a pneumatic injector. The rest of the squad was already there, looking sullen. Harley was swinging her legs, humming. Deadshot was staring at a fixed point on the wall. Boomerang was sweating profusely. King Shark looked bored. Amanda Waller entered, her heels clicking ominously on the linoleum floor. It's time for your company physical, she announced, her voice dripping with false cheer. A little something to ensure team cohesion. One by one, they were called up. The medic would swab their neck, and the injector would hiss as it delivered its lethal payload. Harley winced dramatically. Boomerang nearly fainted. Deadshot took it without a flicker of emotion. King Shark barely seemed to notice. Then it was Izuku's turn. He walked to the chair and sat down, his back ramrod straight. As the medic approached with the injector, his mind wasn't on the pain or the fear. It was a rapid-fire stream of analysis. Device dimensions approximately 3 mm x 1 mm. Injection site, C3 vertebra. Proximity to brain stem ensures instantaneous fatality. Delivery mechanism is pneumatic, suggesting a solid-state device, not liquid. Power source must be self-contained, likely a micro-battery with a lifespan of several years. What is the fail-safe? Is there a secondary trigger? A dead man's switch? The needle pricked his skin. It was a cold, sharp sting, followed by a strange pressure, as the nanite charge embedded itself in the tissue of his neck. He felt a faint, alien warmth for a moment, and then nothing. It was done. The sword of Damocles was now hanging by a thread of encrypted radio waves inside his own body. The reality of it was a cold weight in his gut. He was no longer just a prisoner. He was ordnance, To drive the point home, Waller gestured to a large monitor on the wall. It showed a different part of the prison. An inmate, a large, brutish man with a minor pyrokinetic quirk, was mouthing off to a guard. "This is an example of what happens to employees who fail to follow management's directives," Waller said calmly. On the screen, the inmate's head was suddenly enveloped in a flash of white-hot light and a sickening crack-pop sound. His body stood for a second, headless, before collapsing in a heap. The guards around it didn't even flinch. The room was silent. The message was brutally, unequivocally clear. "Any questions?" Waller asked the squad. No one spoke. The fear was a tangible thing now, a shared poison in their veins. The briefing room was a gray box, dominated by a large tactical screen. The newly minted Task Force X, now clad in mismatched tactical gear scavenged from a storage locker, sat around a metal table. Izuku was wearing standard black fatigues, which were slightly too large for him. He had already started mentally redesigning them. Waller stood at a podium, an avatar of grim purpose. "All right, you degenerates, listen up." The screen behind her lit up with an image of a brutalist concrete facility, half swallowed by a dense, unfamiliar jungle. "Your target is here," she said, pointing to the image. "A private, off-the-books research and development facility in the sovereign nation of Latava. The country is currently embroiled in a civil war, making it the perfect place for sensitive work to go unnoticed. The facility is owned and operated by a shell corporation for LexCorp." Deadshot grunted. "Luther. Figures. The facility's lead scientist is a Dr. Elias Thorne." Waller continued, his picture flashing on screen, a man with intelligent, fanatical eyes. "Thorne was working on a revolutionary project, a targeted neurotoxin capable of permanently nullifying the metagene. A quirk-canceling gas." Izuku's eyes narrowed. A quirk-canceling agent was a geopolitical game-changer. The strategic value was immeasurable. It was also, from a biochemical standpoint, borderline impossible. The metagene wasn't a virus, it was an integral part of human DNA. To cancel it would be to rewrite a person on a fundamental level. Something about the official story felt incomplete. An inefficient lie. 2 days ago, Waller said, her voice grim. "The facility went dark. We lost all contact. We believe a local militia faction overran the compound, or worse, Thorne's experiment went out of control. Your mission is simple. Infiltrate the facility, retrieve Dr. Thorne and all of his research data, and then plant this." She gestured to a guard who placed a heavy-looking explosive charge on the table. "Once you and the package are clear, you will level the entire installation. This mission is classified above top secret. You will be inserted by Halo drop at 0400. You are deniable. If you are captured or killed, no one is coming for you." She looked around the room, her gaze lingering on each of them before finally settling on Izuku. "Lawton, your team lead," she said, and Deadshot nodded curtly. "But Midoriya is your strategist. He has full access to our tactical intel. You will listen to him. His analysis is your best chance of walking away from this." Boomerang scoffed. "You're putting the pipsqueak in charge of the thinking part? We're dead. Your comms are slave to my network, Harkness." Waller's voice dropped to a deadly whisper. "I can hear every word you say. Keep testing me." Boomerang paled and shut his mouth. Izuku was already staring at the tactical screen, his mind absorbing the data, running simulations. "The provided schematics are incomplete," he said, speaking up for the first time. "They only show the main structure. There's no information on the subterranean levels, power grid infrastructure, or geological surveys of the area. The local militia, what's their strength, armament, and political allegiance? What are the atmospheric conditions for the drop zone? What's our exfiltration plan if the primary extraction point is compromised?" Waller allowed herself a small, cold smile. The rest of the squad was thinking about the fight. Midoriya was already 3 moves ahead, planning for the aftermath. "All available intel is being downloaded to the data slate I've provided you," Waller said, gesturing to a ruggedized tablet in front of Izuku. "Anything else, you'll have to acquire on the ground. Welcome to the Suicide Squad." She turned and walked out of the room, leaving them in a heavy, expectant silence. The tension was broken by Deadshot, who stood up and racked his rifle. "All right, you heard the lady. Gear up." He looked over at Izuku, who was already furiously swiping through the data on his tablet, his face illuminated by its glow, his expression one of intense, almost inhuman focus. Deadshot walked over and stood beside him, looking down at the screen full of incomprehensible data streams and blueprints. "Try to keep up, kid," he said, his voice low. "And for the love of God, try not to get us all killed on your first day." Izuku didn't look up from the screen. "My primary function is to maximize squad survivability and mission success probability," he replied, his fingers still flying. "Getting you killed would be counterintuitive to that objective." For the first time since meeting him, Floyd Lawton, the man who never misses, found himself completely unable to get a read on the strange, analytical boy who was now responsible for their lives. He just grunted and walked away, leaving Izuku alone with the cold, hard data of their impending doom. The hangar bay of Belle Reve was a cavern of cold steel and industrial grime, smelling sharply of jet fuel and the metallic tang of ozone. A hulking, matte black C-130 transport plane sat in the center of the bay like a brooding, ugly beast of prey, its rear cargo ramp lowered like a hungry maw. This was their ride. Task Force X was issued its gear from a series of dented olive-drab footlockers. The term gear was generous. It was a hodgepodge of surplus equipment, well-used and impersonal. A standard black BDU, a Maul chest rig with empty pouches, a generic K-bar combat knife, and a standard-issue Glock 19 sidearm with 3 magazines. It was the uniform of the disposable, a kit designed for a mission with no expectation of a return journey. The others geared up with practiced familiarity, or chaotic flair. Deadshot moved with the fluid economy of a lifelong professional, his custom-made wrist magnums and iconic helmet clicking into place over his prison-issue fatigues. He was a walking arsenal. Harley Quinn zipped herself into a worn leather jacket over a tattered t-shirt that read Daddy's Lil' Monster, treating the preparation like a twisted dress-up party. Captain Boomerang grumbled as he strapped on his rig, carefully placing his collection of razor-sharp boomerangs into their custom holsters. King Shark was simply handed a comically large pair of tactical shorts, which he put on with a grunt of mild interest. Izuku laid his own gear out on a crate with the precision of a surgeon arranging his instruments. To the others, it was a pile of second-rate equipment. To him, it was a set of problems to be solved. He picked up the ruggedized tablet Waller had given him. It was military-grade, but military-grade only meant it was designed to survive a fall, not a Vladivan jungle. He quickly got to work, his fingers moving with a speed that belied their slender form. He pried open a discarded crate of packing foam, carving out a perfectly sized, shock-absorbent liner. He wrapped the entire assembly in half a roll of Gorilla Tape, creating a crude but effective waterproof, impact-resistant casing. Deadshot watched him from the corner of his eye, a glint of professional curiosity cutting through his usual cynicism. The kid wasn't just a hacker. He knew his way around hardware. Next, Izuku turned his attention to the helmet. It came with a standard flip-down visor. He produced a small toolkit he'd insisted upon, containing a soldering iron, a spool of wire, and a handful of microprocessors he'd acquired from the prison's comms repair workshop. He pried open the visor's housing and began to work. With deft, precise movements, he soldered a small data port into the helmet's internal wiring, running a shielded cable from it that he plugged directly into his newly fortified tablet. Harley skipped over, intrigued. "What ya buildin', Brainiac? A death ray? Please say it's a death ray, it's a heads-up display," Izuku explained without looking up, his voice a focused monotone. He began typing lines of code into his tablet, the green text scrolling rapidly. "I'm saving the visor to the tablet's processing power. It will provide real-time trajectory analysis for thrown objects, thermal imaging by amplifying ambient infrared radiation, and a visual representation of acoustic data picked up by the helmet's comms microphone." "So, a super nerd helmet," she chirped. "Got it." He ignored her, his focus absolute. His final project was his gauntlets. They were simple leather gloves. Unacceptable. He scavenged a broken stun baton from a guard's reject pile and a small, high-torque winch motor from a maintenance locker. He carefully disassembled them, rewiring the stun baton's capacitor and contact points into the knuckles of his right glove. The left gauntlet became home to the winch motor, which he attached to a spool of high-tensile microfiber line and a small, four-pronged grappling hook. They were crude, ugly, and powered by salvaged batteries, but they were functional. He had mobility. He had a non-lethal option. He had turned a pile of junk into a suite of tactical tools. When he was finished, he stood and donned his creations. The helmet felt heavy, the gear cumbersome. He was a strategist, not a soldier. But in this new, brutal equation, he had to be both. Deadshot gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. It wasn't praise. It was professional acknowledgement. He recognized the work of a craftsman, another predator meticulously sharpening his claws before the hunt. Time to go, kids! Lawton's voice cut through the hangar. The grown-ups are done talking. The flight inside the C-130 was a study in tension. The interior of the plane was a ribcage of exposed wiring and metal, lit by the hellish red glow of the combat lights. The roar of the 4 turboprop engines was a deafening, bone-rattling constant. The squad sat on canvas webbing seats that lined the fuselage. Deadshot was a statue, helmet on, rifle across his lap, utterly still. Harley was humming to herself, swinging her legs like a child on a park bench. Boomerang was a mess, his face pale, a sheen of sweat on his brow, his knuckles white where he gripped the webbing. King Shark had wedged his massive frame into a corner and appeared to be asleep. A low, rumbling snore occasionally audible even over the engines. Izuku was anything but still. He sat hunched over his tablet, absorbing every last byte of data. Vladivan topography, local flora and fauna, known militia dialects, wind speeds at various altitudes. His mind was a whirlwind of calculations, running contingency plans for 100 different failure scenarios. This was his element. In the chaos of data, he found a cold, comforting order. After hours that felt like an eternity, Waller's voice, crisp and disembodied, crackled through their headsets. You are approaching the drop zone. 30,000 feet. 5 minutes to green light. Remember your objective, Thorne and his data. Everything else is secondary. The rear cargo ramp began to lower with a hydraulic groan, revealing a breathtaking, terrifying vista. Below them, a thick, unbroken blanket of clouds swirled like a roiling sea. The air that blasted into the cabin was thin and bitingly cold, sucking the warmth from the plane. Oxygen on! Deadshot commanded. They all donned their masks, the hiss of regulated air a sudden, intimate sound in their ears. Boomerang looked out at the endless drop and swallowed hard. Bloody hell. You'd have to be a real lunatic to jump out of a perfectly good plane. Good thing we're all bonkers then. Harley cackled, her voice slightly muffled by her mask. She did a little shimmy of excitement. Green light in 60 seconds, Waller's voice announced. The team moved to the edge of the ramp, a collection of misfits and monsters silhouetted against the swirling abyss. Izuku's heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic, primal rhythm that his analytical mind couldn't suppress. He had simulated this a dozen times in his head. The reality was infinitely more terrifying. 10 seconds! He took a deep breath of canned air. 5, 4, 3... Suddenly, the world dissolved into a concussive roar and a flash of blinding white light. The plane lurched violently, throwing them all off balance. A high-pitched alarm screamed through the cabin. Red lights flashed in a frantic, panicked staccato. Missile lock! We're hit! I repeat, we are hit! The pilot's voice yelled over the comms, laced with static and terror. Izuku was thrown against the fuselage, his head cracking against the metal strut. His vision swam. Through the ringing in his ears he heard Deadshot's steady command. Shrapnel in engine 2! We're going down! Everyone out! Go, go, go! There was no coordinated jump now. It was a desperate, chaotic exodus. Deadshot shoved Boomerang out into the screaming void. Harley let out a whoop of glee and swan dived after him. King Shark, jolted awake, simply lumbered to the edge and fell out. Izuku scrambled back to his feet, his mind reeling. The plane was in a steep, shuddering dive. He saw Deadshot at the edge, turning back, his hand outstretched. But another explosion rocked the plane, this one closer, and a shower of sparks erupted from a control panel. The plane tilted violently, and Izuku lost his footing, sliding across the metal floor and out into the open air. The world became a symphony of wind. He was tumbling end over end, the sky and the cloud sea below swapping places in a nauseating blur. His training, the mental simulations, all of it evaporated in the face of pure, primal terror. He was a quirkless boy falling from the heavens. Then, instinct, or perhaps just the sheer force of his analytical will, kicked in. He forced his limbs out, arching his back to stop the tumble, stabilizing himself into a flat, spread-eagle position. The roaring wind became a steady pressure. Below him, the clouds rushed up to meet him, a vast, white floor. He plunged into them, and the world became a blind, damp, gray chaos. He broke through the cloud layer a few thousand feet later. The Vladivan jungle sprawled below him, a carpet of endless, hostile green. He saw no sign of the others. He was alone. He checked his wrist altimeter. 2,000 feet. Time. He pulled the ripcord. The parachute deployed with a violent, spine-jarring jerk. His rapid descent slowed to a gentle drift. The silence, after the roar of the plane and the screaming wind of freefall, was deafening. He was alive. His landing was anything but gentle. The jungle canopy was not a soft net. He crashed through a lattice of thick branches and tangled vines, the impact tearing at his gear and his skin. A thick vine snagged his parachute, leaving him dangling 20 feet above the forest floor, spinning slowly. He fumbled for his knife, sawed through the suspension lines, and dropped the rest of the way, landing in a heap on the damp, mossy ground. For a long moment, he just lay there, every muscle aching, his head throbbing. The air was thick and oppressively humid, filled with the drone of insects and the calls of unseen animals. The jungle was alive, and it did not feel welcoming. He pushed himself to his feet, a wave of dizziness washing over him. He ran a systems check first on himself. No broken bones. Bruises, scrapes, a mild concussion, but functional. Then his gear. The tablet was intact, its crude casing having done its job. The HUD in his visor flickered to life. His gauntlets were still operational. He had his knife and his sidearm. He was operational. His first priority was survival. His second, locating the rally point. He activated the offline map on his tablet. The rally point was 5 kilometers to the northeast. A 5-kilometer trek through dense, unknown, and almost certainly hostile territory. Alone, he had been in his room, behind a wall of monitors for 4 years. The world had been a collection of data points, of predictable systems and exploitable code. This was different. The jungle was a chaotic algorithm of life and death, and he was a foreign piece of code that had just been injected into it. He began to move, not with the confidence of a soldier, but with the cautious precision of a bomb disposal expert. Every step was deliberate. He listened, his helmet's microphone amplifying the sounds of the jungle. A snapping twig could be a predator. A rustle in the undergrowth could be a snake. He used his visor's thermal imaging to scan the dense foliage ahead, painting the world in shifting heat signatures. He hadn't been moving for more than 20 minutes when he heard it. Voices. Harsh, guttural, spoken in the Vladivan dialect he'd studied. He dropped into a crouch behind the massive roots of a banyan tree, his heart pounding a nervous rhythm against his ribs. A patrol. 4 men, dressed in mismatched camouflage and armed with Asian Kalashnikovs. They were sweeping the area, likely looking for survivors from the plane crash. They were loud, clumsy, moving with the careless confidence of men who believed they owned the forest. This was his first real test. There was no knuckleduster to act as his proxy. There was no firewall to bypass. This was a physical problem that required a physical solution, and he was physically outmatched in every conceivable way. He couldn't fight them. He couldn't run. So he had to outthink them. He watched their patrol route, his mind dissecting their movements, identifying their patterns. They were sweeping in a loose circular pattern, their leader occasionally stopping to scan the trees. An idea, cold and clinical, began to form in his mind. He waited until they were on the far side of their loop. He moved quickly and silently to a thick, hanging vine that crossed their path. He used his knife to fray the vine near its base, weakening it. He then took a length of his parachute's microfiber cord and tied it to the vine, running the other end to a nearby fallen log, creating a crude but effective tripwire. He smeared his tracks with mud and retreated to a dense thicket of ferns 50 yards away, his heart a cold, steady drum. The patrol came back around. Izuku watched through his visor, his breath held tight in his chest. The point man, careless and overconfident, walked right into the tripwire. The result was not a deadly explosion, but carefully orchestrated chaos. The tripwire pulled the weakened vine, which snapped and dropped a massive, rotting branch from 30 feet up. It didn't hit anyone, but it crashed to the ground with a sound like a thunderclap, showering them with leaves and debris. The soldiers panicked. They yelled, spun around, and fired blindly into the jungle canopy. They thought they were under attack. Their discipline, what little they had, completely shattered. While they were distracted, shooting at shadows, Izuku slipped away, a ghost melting back into the green. He hadn't hurt anyone. He hadn't fired a shot. He had used their own fear and incompetence against them. He had treated the jungle like a system and the soldiers like flawed code. And he had won. A new kind of confidence, cold and sharp, began to settle in his gut. Maybe he could do this. 2 hours of grueling trekking later, Izuku approached the designated rally point, a set of crumbling, vine-choked ruins that might have been a temple centuries ago. The air was suddenly split by the sharp crack of automatic rifle fire, followed by a distinctive, aerodynamic whiz-thump sound that Izuku immediately recognized from his research. A boomerang. He dropped low, creeping forward until he could peer through the dense foliage. The scene was exactly as he'd feared. Captain Boomerang was pinned down behind the remains of a stone altar, firing his sharpened boomerangs with desperate, panicked energy. 3 militia soldiers were laying down suppressive fire from behind a collapsed wall, methodically advancing on his position. Digger was trapped, outgunned, and seconds away from being overrun. Izuku's mind went into overdrive. No time for elaborate traps. This required immediate, decisive action. He activated his comms, keeping the channel narrow and focused. Harkness, this is Analysis. Report. A string of curses was the immediate reply. Analysis? Where the hell are you, you little ghost? I'm a bit bloody busy right now. A bullet ricocheted off the stone near him with a loud ping. I have eyes on your position, Izuku said, his voice a mask of calm authority. His visor was already painting the scene with tactical data. He marked the 3 hostiles, calculated their fields of fire, and analyzed the structural integrity of the ruins around them. They're trying to flank you on your right. They are coordinating their fire. One shoots while the other 2 advance. They are disciplined. More so than the patrol. No kidding! Boomerang yelled, ducking as a burst of automatic fire chewed up the top of the altar. You got a brilliant plan, or did you just call to narrate my death? I have a plan, Izuku stated. He analyzed the environment. Loose stones. A precariously balanced section of a crumbling archway above the soldier's position. An opening. Listen to me, and do exactly as I say. Your life depends on it. The sheer confidence in the kid's voice gave Digger pause. He was about to die. What did he have to lose? All right, Spock. Let's hear it. On my mark, I need you to throw one of your explosive-tipped boomerangs. Not at them. At the wall 20 feet to their left. The sound and flash will draw their attention. A diversion? That's your genius plan? Digger scoffed. It is the first step in a 7-second sequence. Izuku snapped, his voice sharp. Are you capable of following instructions or not? Stung by the rebuke, Boomerang grumbled. Fine. Just say when. Izuku took a deep breath. His hands were slick with sweat. He picked up a fist-sized rock. Mark! He hurled the rock with all his might. It sailed through the air and clattered against the stone pillar on the far side of the soldiers, to their right. It was a pathetic throw, but it was enough. For a split second, 2 of the soldiers glanced in the direction of the noise. Now, Harkness! Your left! Izuku commanded. Boomerang, acting on pure instinct, let fly. The explosive boomerang arced through the air and detonated against the wall with a deafening crack and a brilliant flash of light. Just as Izuku predicted, all 3 soldiers flinched and turned towards the blast. Their attention was completely diverted. Their formation was broken. It was the window he needed. The soldier on the right, the one closest to you, is reloading, Izuku's voice was a surgeon's command in Digger's ear, precise and certain. He'd been timing their bursts of fire, counting the shots. He knew the AK-47's 30-round magazine was dry. You have a 2.8-second window. Take him out. Now. Boomerang didn't hesitate. He sent a razor-edged boomerang spinning through the air. It caught the reloading soldier in the chest, and he went down with a choked cry. One down. The other two spun back around, confused and exposed. The archway above them! Izuku yelled. Hit the keystone! Your heaviest boomerang! Digger saw it. The crumbling stone arch, weakened by centuries of decay. He grabbed his weighted, bludgeoning boomerang and threw it with every ounce of strength he had. It struck the central keystone with a mighty crunch. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a groan of ancient stone, the entire archway collapsed, burying the remaining two soldiers under a ton of rubble. Silence. The only sound was Digger Harkness's ragged, heaving breaths. He slowly stood up from behind the altar, his eyes wide with disbelief. He looked at the spot where the soldiers had been, now just a pile of stone and dust. He looked down at the boomerang in his hand. He was alive. He was alive because of the kid. Izuku emerged from the jungle, his tablet in hand, his face a mask of cold, focused neutrality. He looked less like a savior and more like an accountant who had just finished balancing a particularly difficult ledger. Took you long enough, you little ankle-biter. Boomerang rasped, his voice shaky. He was trying to project his usual bravado, but it was a thin, brittle veneer. I had him right where I wanted him. Izuku simply stared at him. You were 3.4 seconds from fatal injury. Your position was compromised, and you were wasting ammunition on non-critical targets. My intervention increased your survival probability from 1.2% to 98.7%. Digger opened his mouth to retort, but no words came out. He had been a liability, and this kid, this quirkless nerd, had turned him into a lethal weapon. A debt had been formed, whether he wanted to admit it or not. The sound of heavy footfalls and crashing undergrowth announced the arrival of the rest of the squad. Deadshot and Harley emerged from one side of the clearing, while King Shark simply smashed his way through a wall of bamboo on the other. They took in the scene at a glance: the dead soldier, the pile of rubble, a panting, shell-shocked boomerang, and Izuku, standing calmly amidst the carnage, looking completely untouched. Deadshot raised a single, skeptical eyebrow. What happened here? Boomerang just grunted, unwilling to give the kid credit. Had a bit of a welcoming party. Handled it, but Harley Quinn wasn't buying it. She skipped over to Izuku, her eyes sparkling with a manic curiosity. You did this, didn't you, Sprout? You used the loudmouth Aussie like a chess piece. Oh, this is gonna be so much fun. Deadshot looked from Boomerang's shaken expression to Izuku's unnervingly calm demeanor. He saw the new dent in the stone wall from the explosive, the collapsed archway. It was too precise, too tactical to be Digger's usual brand of chaotic violence. The kid had done this. The kid had saved their most useless member, and neutralized the threat without a scratch on him. For the first time, Task Force X was all together, standing in a clearing deep in enemy territory. They were battered, scattered, but alive, and as they looked at the quiet, analytical boy in their midst, their perception of him began to shift. He wasn't just the kid anymore. He wasn't a liability, he was their strategist. And he might just be the only thing standing between them and a shallow, unmarked grave. The Vladivan jungle was a living, breathing entity, and it was actively trying to kill them. The air was a suffocating blanket of humidity so thick it felt like breathing water. Unseen insects with bites that raised angry, itching welts feasted on any exposed patch of skin. The ground itself was a treacherous morass of sucking mud and tangled roots designed to snap an ankle. For hours, Task Force X pushed through the oppressive green hell, guided by the cold, unwavering logic of Izuku Midoriya. He was a strange, almost alien figure at the head of their formation. While the others hacked at vines with their knives and cursed the relentless heat, Izuku moved with a quiet, focused intensity. His eyes, amplified by the HUD in his visor, were constantly scanning, his head tilting as his helmet's audio sensors picked up the faintest sounds. He led them not like a soldier, but like a predator navigating its own hunting grounds. Hold! He'd command, his voice a low monotone in their calms. They'd freeze, and a moment later, a venomous, iridescent blue snake would slither across the path where they would have stepped. Thermal signature indicates a pit viper. Highly neurotoxic. We go around. Deadshot, a man who had survived jungles on 3 continents, found himself deferring to the kid's judgment without question. There was an unnerving certainty to Izuku's analysis that defied his inexperience. He saw patterns in the chaos that Lawton, for all his veteran instincts, couldn't perceive. How do you know this stuff, kid? Deadshot finally asked, his voice a low grumble as they paused for a brief water break. Don't tell me you were some kind of Boy Scout. Izuku, who was examining a strange, pulsating fungus on the side of a tree, answered without looking at him. When I was 10, I wrote a 200-page analysis on the quirk of the pro-hero Ryukyu. Her dragon form has draconic fauna attributes. To understand her, I had to study herpetology and reptilian biology. The pit viper's ambush patterns are remarkably similar to the hunting strategies of the Komodo dragon, factoring for scale and environmental differences. He turned his head, his green eyes meeting Deadshot's through the visor. All data is connected. You just have to find the right algorithm to process it. Deadshot just shook his head and took a swig from his canteen. The kid wasn't just smart. He was operating on a different plane of existence. Finally, after what felt like a lifetime of sweat and suffering, they saw it. The facility. It rose from the jungle like a concrete tombstone, a monument to brutalist architecture and human hubris. It was a stark, gray wedge of right angles and flat surfaces, already stained with green mildew and scarred by creeping vines. There were no fences, no guard towers, no visible patrols. The only sound was the incessant thrum of the jungle and the low, almost subliminal hum of a powerful generator somewhere deep within the structure. Looks like nobody's home. Boomerang grunted, spitting a wad of tobacco juice onto a broadleaf plant, which immediately began to curl and blacken at the edges. Quiet is not the same as empty, Izuku cautioned, his visor already scanning the structure. Thermal shows power is active throughout the facility. Life signs are inconclusive. There's a high level of ambient energy interference. Something inside is scrambling my sensors. So we kick in the front door? Harley asked, hefting the oversized novelty mallet she'd insisted on bringing. Negative, Deadshot said, his rifle already up and scanning. We find a subtle way in. Windows, vents, maintenance hatches, 3rd floor, northeast corner, Izuku said immediately, pointing. There's a ventilation intake port. The housing is standard aluminum, held by 4 hexagonal bolts. It leads directly to the primary sublevel ventilation shaft. It's the path of least resistance. The others stared up. From their position, the vent was just a dark square on a sheer concrete wall, a good 70 feet up. Great plan, kid, Boomerang sneered. You got wings you forgot to tell us about? Izuku didn't answer. He simply raised his left arm, aimed the crude grappling hook gauntlet he'd built, and fired. The hook shot upwards, trailing its thin, strong line, and with a satisfying thunk, the prongs bit deep into the aluminum housing of the vent. He gave the line a hard tug. It held. He turned to the rest of the squad. King Shark. You're too heavy for the line. You'll have to find another way in, preferably something loud to create a diversion if we need it. The rest of you ascend. He began to climb, the small winch motor in his gauntlet whining as it effortlessly pulled him up the sheer wall. Harley let out a whoop and scrambled up after him, her gymnastic prowess making the climb look easy. Deadshot, ever the professional, followed with a practiced, steady ascent. Boomerang cursed under his breath but clipped on and began the slow, clumsy climb, his fear of being left behind greater than his fear of heights. King Shark just shrugged his massive shoulders and lumbered off towards the front of the building. A few moments later, a loud, resounding crunch echoed through the jungle as he presumably made his own door. Inside the ventilation shaft, the air was cold and smelled of ozone and decay. It was pitch black, a claustrophobic metal tunnel just large enough for them to crawl through single file. Izuku led the way, his visor's night vision turning the oppressive darkness into a world of ghostly green shapes. This place gives me the creeps, Harley's voice whispered in his ear, unnaturally close in the confined space. It's too quiet. Even Arkham wasn't this quiet. At least there you had the screaming. Screaming's honest, you know? Izuku didn't respond. He was focused on the schematics overlaid on his vision, guiding them through the labyrinthine network of ducts. After a few minutes of crawling, he found an exit grate that overlooked a long, sterile white corridor. He peered through the slats. The hallway was empty. The lights were on, flickering intermittently. A series of heavy steel doors lined the walls. But something was profoundly wrong. The floor was littered with scattered papers, overturned medical carts, and shattered beakers. A large, dark brown stain, unmistakably dried blood, was smeared across one of the walls, ending in a set of frantic, dragged handprints. But it was the growths that truly chilled him. Patches of a strange, crystalline fungus clung to the walls and ceiling, pulsing with a faint, internal bioluminescence. They were an unnatural shade of violet, and seemed to thrum with the same energy that was interfering with his sensors. Something bad happened here, Deadshot stated, his voice a low murmur. Define bad, Boomerang whispered. Are we talking spilled my beer bad or alien chestburster bad? Izuku didn't need to answer. He pried the grate open and dropped silently to the corridor floor, his sidearm drawn. The others followed, their boots making soft sounds on the linoleum. The silence was absolute, a heavy, listening silence that felt far more menacing than any alarm. Objective is the central server room to download Thorn's research, then locate Thorn himself in the main laboratory, Izuku recited, his voice barely a whisper. He was already moving, his eyes scanning every detail, his mind processing the scene like a detective at a fresh crime scene. This way, he led them through a maze of identical, sterile corridors, each one bearing more signs of a violent, panicked struggle. They found a laboratory that had been completely ransacked. Microscopes were smashed, computer monitors were shattered, and cages designed to hold lab animals had been torn open, their metal bars bent outwards as if by incredible force. In the center of the room, a lone office chair was spinning slowly, moved by some unseen draft. It was in this lab that Izuku found it, a small, handheld data recorder lying beneath an overturned desk. He picked it up and plugged it into his tablet. Accessing the facility's logs, he murmured, his fingers flying across the screen. Most of the data has been corrupted or wiped, but I'm finding fragments. Audio files. He patched the first file through their comms. The sound was horrifyingly clear. A man's voice, breathless and filled with terror. Is out! Subject 0 has breached containment. Oh God, it's not possible. The quark dampeners aren't working. It's adapting. The voice dissolved into a wet, guttural scream, followed by a sound of tearing metal and a strange, high-pitched chittering. Then silence. Boomerang's face was ashen. Okay. Definitely chestburster bad. Izuku's face was a stony mask, but his mind was racing. Subject 0. Quark dampeners ineffective. Adaptation? This wasn't a simple security breach. He played the next fragment. This time it was a woman's voice, calmer, but laced with a chilling, clinical detachment. It was Dr. Thorne's lead geneticist. Astounding. The serum doesn't just amplify the metagene, it destabilizes it, forcing it into a state of constant, rapid evolution. The subjects exhibit multiple, spontaneous quirk manifestations. The psychological degradation is a, regrettable, but necessary side effect. Dr. Thorne was right. This is not about cancellation. It is about ascension. The truth slammed into Izuku with the force of a physical blow. Waller had lied. They all knew she was manipulative, but this was a lie of staggering proportions. The facility wasn't developing a quirk-canceling agent. It was a factory for creating monsters. She played us. Deadshot snarled, his fist tightening around the grip of his rifle. Send us in blind. This isn't a retrieval mission. It's a goddamn monster hunt. It's a cleanup job. Izuku corrected, his voice dangerously quiet. She knew the project had gone sideways. She sent us in to retrieve what we could and bury the rest. We are the janitors. The cold, pragmatic truth of it settled over them, a shroud of grim understanding. They weren't soldiers. They were disposable tools for a job no one else would touch. Suddenly, a heavy clang echoed from down the hallway, followed by the sound of something massive being dragged across the floor. They all froze, weapons raised, pressing themselves against the walls of the lab. The sound grew closer. Scrape. Drag. Thump. A hulking silhouette appeared in the doorway, blocking the light. King Shark. He was holding a large, cylindrical object under one arm, a piece of the facility's main reactor shielding, which he had apparently repurposed into a club. Found food, he rumbled, and tossed the half-eaten vending machine onto the floor with a loud crash. But no people. No, you gotta be quieter, buddy, Harley chided gently. As if in response to her words, a klaxon alarm began to blare throughout the facility, its piercing shriek echoing off the metal walls. Red lights flashed, bathing the corridors in a hellish, pulsating glow. Lockdown protocol initiated. Unidentified biomass detected. Containment teams, engage. An automated, female voice announced from speakers in the ceiling. Heavy steel shutters slammed down over the doorways, sealing them in the laboratory. Well, Boomerang said, his voice trembling slightly. So much for subtle. They were trapped. The flashing red lights cast long, dancing shadows, making the ransacked lab look even more like a scene from a nightmare. The klaxon was a physical assault, a relentless, nerve-shredding scream. Everybody shut up! Deadshot barked, his voice cutting through the noise. Kid, get us out of here! Now! Izuku was already at a nearby computer terminal, his fingers a blur as he bypassed the security lockdown. But his mind wasn't just on the door. It was on Harley's words from the ventilation shaft. Screaming's honest. The alarm cut out as suddenly as it began, plunging them into a ringing silence. A single, heavy thud echoed from the steel shutter blocking the door. Then another. Thud. They all turned, weapons trained on the door. The sound was rhythmic, deliberate. Something was trying to get in. Thud. 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 A deep dent appeared in the center of the thick steel door. Then another, and another. The metal began to groan, to buckle inwards. In the tense, suffocating silence, Harley Quinn's voice was surprisingly calm, almost conversational. She was looking at Izuku, her head tilted, a strange, knowing look in her eyes. You know, for a guy who's all about numbers and patterns, you sure do try hard, she said, her voice a low murmur that only he could hear. Izuku didn't look away from the groaning door. I don't know what you're talking about. Yeah, you do, she pressed, stepping closer. The door buckled further, the sound of tearing metal screaming in the small room. All this. She gestured vaguely at him, at his gear, at the tablet in his hand. The analysis, the plans, the probability of success, it's all just armor, Sprout. You're trying to think your way into being a hero. His fingers froze on the keyboard. Her words struck a nerve he thought was long dead. I'm not a hero, he said, his voice flat. Aren't ya? Harley's smile was sad, genuine. You saved Boomas, but back there when you could have let him get shot. You're tracking our vitals on that little gizmo of yours. I saw the display. You're counting the cards, sweetie, trying to find a way for the whole table to win. Her voice dropped to a whisper. You're just playing a different game now. You're still trying to save everyone. You just won't admit it. CRRRREAK boom. The steel door was ripped from its hinges as if it were made of aluminum foil and thrown across the room, embedding itself in the far wall. Standing in the mangled doorway was the thing that had been making the noise. It was the source of the chittering from the audio log. It was humanoid, but only in the loosest sense. It was nearly 7 feet tall, its body a corded, knotted mass of raw muscle and sinew, its skin a pale, translucent white that showed the dark veins pulsing beneath. Its limbs were too long, its fingers ending in hooked, chitinous claws. It had no face, only a smooth expanse of skin where its features should have been. But its most terrifying feature was the collection of razor-sharp mandibles that clicked and chittered around a circular, lamprey-like mouth. This was Subject Zero, and it was staring right at them. The moment of shocked silence was broken by Deadshot. Light it up! The room exploded in a cacophony of gunfire. Deadshot's wrist magnums roared, firing armor-piercing rounds. Boomerang hurled a razor-edged projectile. Harley opened up with a stolen submachine gun, cackling wildly. The bullets and the boomerang struck the creature dead-on, and did absolutely nothing. The rounds ricocheted off its pale skin with metallic pings. The boomerang shattered against its chest. The creature didn't even flinch. It let out a high-pitched shriek, a sound that vibrated in their bones, and charged. It moved with an impossible, blurring speed. One moment it was in the doorway, the next it was on top of Boomerang, swiping a clawed hand that sent him flying across the room to crash into a rack of chemical supplies. King Shark roared and charged, a mountain of muscle and fury. "You are not food!" He swung his massive reactor shield club, a blow that could pulverize concrete. Subject Zero met the blow with its bare forearm. The sound of the impact was like a thunderclap, and the club was stopped dead. The creature's arm didn't even seem to register the impact. It was impossibly strong, impossibly fast, and completely invulnerable. They were utterly, hopelessly outmatched. This was the core of Izuku's analysis. He had to find a weakness. There was always a weakness. While the others fought a desperate, losing battle, Izuku wasn't fighting. He was watching. His visor was in overdrive, recording and analyzing every microsecond of the fight. He wasn't seeing a monster, he was seeing a data stream. The creature's skin hardened just before impact, a crystalline sheen shimmering across its surface. Defensive quirk. Likely some form of diamond-hard carbon secretion. Its speed wasn't constant. It moved in short, and possibly fast bursts, followed by a fractional pause. Kinetic energy absorption and release? A super-speed quirk? It shrieked again, and a wave of pure concussive force erupted from its mouth, sending Harley tumbling head over heels. A sonic attack. Multiple quirks. Just as the log had said. But no biological entity could manifest that many high-yield powers simultaneously without a drawback. There had to be a pattern. A tell. A cooldown. "It's playing with us!" Deadshot yelled, dodging another lightning-fast swipe. "It could have killed us all by now!" Izuku's eyes widened. Lawton was right. The creature wasn't trying to kill them. It was testing them. It was analyzing them. It was a strategist. And that gave him an idea. A terrible, insane, brilliant idea. He had to overload its ability to process information. He opened a private channel to Harley, his voice a low, urgent command in her ear. "Harley, I need a psychological diversion. Its file, the fragmented data from the logs, it mentioned a name, the original subject. A family man named Kaido Tanaka. He had a wife, a daughter, Harley, who had just picked herself up, grinned a bloody, manic grin. "Oh, Puddin'," she whispered into her comm. "You and I are gonna get along just fine." While Deadshot and King Shark kept the creature busy, Harley did what she did best. She became chaos incarnate. She stopped shooting and started talking. "Hey, ugly!" she shouted, cartwheeling into the open. You remind me of a guy I once knew. Big, strong, liked to throw people around. But he had a smile, at least. You remember how to smile, Kaido?" Subject Zero paused, its faceless head tilting at the sound of the name. It was a barely perceptible hesitation, but it was there. Izuku saw it. Cognitive dissonance. The base personality is still in there. Suppressed, but present. "That's it." Izuku's voice crackled over the main comm, no longer a monotone but a sharp, commanding bark. "It can't process everything at once. It's switching between quirks, it can't use them all at the same time. Overload it." He switched his visor to thermal. Just as he'd suspected. Before each burst of speed, a network of veins in the creature's legs would glow white-hot. Before the sonic scream, its chest would flare with heat. Before its skin hardened, its entire surface would cool dramatically. They were tells. Perfect, predictable tells. "Dead shot," he commanded. "The energy blast has a 3-second charge time. You'll see a glow in its chest. The moment it fires, you have a 1.5-second window. Aim for its left knee. It's an unarmored joint." Deadshot didn't question it. He saw the faint glow begin in the creature's chest and took aim. The monster unleashed a torrent of golden energy, forcing King Shark to stumble back. The moment the blast subsided, Deadshot fired. The bullet, aimed with a marksman's perfection, struck the creature's knee. It didn't pierce the skin, but the kinetic impact was enough. Subject Zero buckled, its leg bending at an unnatural angle with a wet, snapping sound. It let out a shriek of genuine pain. "King Shark!" Izuku yelled. After it uses the skin-hardening quirk, its internal temperature plummets. It's vulnerable to blunt force trauma for 2 seconds after the effect wears off. Wait for the shimmer to fade, then hit it with everything you have. The creature's skin shimmered with its diamond-hard coating, deflecting another volley of bullets from Harley. The shimmer faded. Now! King Shark roared and brought his massive club down in a devastating arc. This time, there was no metallic clang. There was a sickening, wet crunch as the club connected with the creature's shoulder, shattering the bone. Subject Zero was crippled. It was wounded. It was no longer an invincible god. It was just a cornered, wounded animal. It tried to let out another sonic scream, but it choked, sputtering. Its systems were overloaded. Its body couldn't keep up with its conflicting, chaotic powers. It collapsed to the floor, twitching, its form flickering and distorting as its unstable biology began to break down. The members of Task Force X stood panting, staring at their fallen foe. They were battered, bruised, but they were alive. They hadn't won through brute force or sheer power. They had won because of Izuku. He had turned them from a dysfunctional mob into a precision strike team. He had been their eyes, their brain, their weapon. For the first time, they weren't just looking at a tag-along. They were looking at their leader. Izuku walked over to the twitching form of Subject Zero. He knelt, his face unreadable. The creature's chittering had softened to a low, painful moan. It's over, Izuku said, his voice quiet. He raised his sidearm, the cold, pragmatic choice clear. But as he looked at the pathetic, dying creature on the floor, he didn't see a monster. He saw Kaido Tanaka. A man who had been twisted into a weapon by another man's ambition. A victim. He lowered his gun. He wasn't a hero. But he wasn't a killer either. Not like this. Deadshot walked up behind him, his own weapon raised. Move, kid! I'll finish it. Before he could, the creature gave one last, violent spasm. The crystalline growths that dotted its body suddenly flared with a brilliant violet light, then shattered into dust. The creature's body went limp, its strange life finally extinguished. The lockdown shutters retracted with a loud groan, and the emergency lights were replaced by the flickering, sterile white of the main corridor. The path forward was open, but as they stood in the silent, wrecked laboratory, a new, more terrifying thought settled over them. This was just Subject Zero. The prototype. What, Izuku wondered with a cold knot of dread in his stomach, would they find in the main lab, where Dr. Thorne had perfected his work?